I want to share some thoughts and feelings today on the inability to enjoy yourself. Particularly, this is for you if you're someone who's feeling very confused that you're watching everyone around you get satisfaction and enjoyment, or at least what appears to be satisfaction and enjoyment from all of their everyday activities and their life in general. But you're feeling at some level for you, this isn't really clicking. Like you're doing the things that everyone has told you that you should do, and you're doing the stuff that life is apparently about, but there's still kind of this hollowness, and you're contrasting yourself with these other people, whether it's friends or family or even an intimate partner. You're seeing other people do these things via social media or whatever, and you're just feeling really confused at some level because you're just like, I don't get it. Like, is it eventually supposed to get good? And then what ends up happening is like, eventually you'll maybe mention this to someone, whether it's overtly or covertly. You might not say these words explicitly to them, but you'll sort of hint at this. And then what can happen is people will kind of just, they'll sort of goad you away from the feeling by saying something like, oh, don't worry, everyone goes through that, but it will get better at some other point. And they kind of like dismiss the feeling right now and suggest that at some other point things will all make sense. And sometimes people who are a lot older than you and have a lot more life experience than you can do this, right? They'll sort of say, oh, it all starts to make sense later on, kind of thing. But time's going by and you're still finding that you find this perplexing thing in yourself, which is like, I can't really seem to derive satisfaction or fulfillment from things in the way that people around me are. And more so, I don't really understand what this is all about. Like, it's not like I want to kill myself. It's not like I don't want to be alive anymore. It's just that I don't really understand what the deal is. And maybe you're someone who thinks quite deeply and existentially about these things, like I do. And you start questioning, like, well, what does it even really mean to derive pleasure or fulfillment or meaning from something at like a deep level? Is it even really possible? I mean, if I have 45 times the income that I have now, or I have like way better relationship prospects, or maybe I live in a part of the world that I never thought I could, like, you look beyond that initial, the initial like shininess of it. It's like that becomes translucent to you after a while. Like, it still has some appeal, but you can see through it. There's a transparency to those things. And then you're starting to think more in terms of, what is it that is actually really going to offer me any fulfillment like that? Is that even really possible? What does it even mean to have that level of fulfillment? There's this term called anhedonia, right? And hedonia means pleasure, right? It translates to pleasure. So the word hedonism, for example, is this sort of excessive pleasure seeking and just sort of like exhausting your reward circuitry, where anhedonia is the inability to experience pleasure. That's sort of the dictionary definition of it, is the inability to derive pleasure from experiences. And I mention this because I want to be able to use it as a basis, but I want to be able to expand on it as well. Because on a superficial level, you could say that everyone goes through anhedonia sometimes. Like, sometimes things aren't super pleasurable. Even things that used to be pleasurable aren't. Life changes, whatever. Your brain changes, your experience, things change over time. Whatever. Not a big deal. But there's this deeper aspect to anhedonia, I feel like. And for me, this has always been quite obvious. This has always been something that's quite present, because even from a pretty young age, when I saw everyone else doing things that they were having a lot of fun doing, or they'd put a lot of energy into, personally, I would just sort of see that it looked kind of like a game. Like I could kind of see why they were doing it. And there was aspects of me that wanted to be involved in it, but there were also other aspects that didn't care and would kind of just do this thing where I would like cognize it as a game. Wouldn't really seem very important to me. And so because of that, you know, a lot of the time I'd actually just sort of observe what people were doing or observe what I was doing rather than actually just be doing it in itself, if that made sense. It's like I'd always kind of be a bit back from the experience. And what this started to lead to as I got into my teens was I found that I would be I found like a deep sense of unhappiness in myself, even in my early teens. Like I felt this kind of like lacking, missing sense. And it was really uncomfortable. I remember even then, like I'm still in touch with what this feeling is, but it's something that I've spent a lot of time being with now. And it seems like a part or an aspect of me where back then it just felt like some sort of curse or something that I really wanted to avoid. It was this very strong sense of discomfort in my early teens. I remember how that felt and how scary it was. Like my reaction to it was often like fear and confusion. And what this led to is it led to a lot of extreme pleasure seeking. So for example, if we were 15 and my friends and I had got a bottle of vodka, or, you know, we got a bag of weed or something, I wasn't really the one who just wanted to take a hit of the joint and a swig of the vodka and then go skating. I was the one who just really wanted to like smoke all the weed or drink all the vodka or take all the pills, you know, or if we were going to play video games, I just wanted to play video games all the time. If I'd watch porn, I'd want to binge porn. I wouldn't just want to watch it once. If I met a girl and I was in a little fling with her I wouldn't want to just hang out once or twice. I'd want to be like together all the time. Anything that made me feel good or offered me that kind of rush, anything that felt like it could abate that sense of just desolateness, I'd pull into that a lot, you know? Pull into that a lot. And it gets challenging over time because there's a diminishing returns aspect to all of that stuff, isn't there? Like, after a while, you feel like you need more of that extreme experience. So at first you need only a little bit of that extreme experience to get a lot of relief. And then over time that inverts itself and you need a lot of extreme experience. You need to smoke weed all the time or drink all the time or be playing video games all the time just to get like a little bit of relief. And then, like I said earlier, that relief that you get starts to look translucent. Like it has some appeal to it, but ultimately you can see through it. And it leaves you feeling like you don't have anything to grab onto and you just don't really know what to do. And there's just this hollowness and this emptiness. And I don't know why for some people they have the ability to go so far into their life without really feeling or experiencing this. They don't really seem to get that sense of like, wow, like what is even really the point of anything? It's like they just stay continually involved within the survival processes that are programmed into our culture, that we're enculturated with for so long that they never really question these things. And it's almost like you can't even talk about questioning these things with people a lot of the time because they just project like their victim complex about how they can't even think about it because of this thing and that thing. Or they get triggered that you've mentioned something and maybe you've inadvertently highlighted their coping mechanism of assuming that life's going to be better in the future, but they're actually not really living very presently now, which is a very direct truth, but very indirect thing for most people to realize. They don't usually come to that of their own accord. It's usually things from the outside that trigger you, and then you realize it highlights those aspects of yourself, highlights how you use your mind to like scaffold life to make yourself feel okay. And so, yeah, a lot of people don't really have any footing in this, and especially younger people, I don't think, because life is just so, everything's just happening when you're younger, where like for me that's just not the case at all. Like when I was like 15 or 16, maybe even younger, like this stuff was all like, it was very obvious to me that nothing could really ever bring me deep fulfillment. And I learned really quickly not to talk to people about it, because again, they would condescend to me and by attempting to placate me with something about, oh, don't worry, eventually, like even my parents, you know, like, oh, eventually this and that. But it's like, yeah, well, you know, you guys are in your 40s and 50s and you don't seem fulfilled or to really have a deep connection to life. I think for a lot of people over time, the thing that they have that most closely resembles contentment is just, it's not surrender in like the deep spiritual sense of like really surrendering to the process of life, but it's more just like giving up because you don't have the energy to sort of like reach for anything anymore, I don't think. But you have just enough avoidance of that sense of emptiness and that sense of meaninglessness that it doesn't overtake you. So it can be very difficult to relate to people about this if this is something you're experiencing. And there's a great bit in one of those Louis C.K. specials where he talks about suicide, and he's saying that like you can't even, I can't remember which one it's from, but in one of Louis C.K.'s comedy specials, he's saying like about how you can't even really say that you're having open-ended thoughts about suicide. Like you can't even say that you've contemplated it, because someone will like press a button under the table and you'll get dragged away. And I feel he's touching on some kind of truth when he says that, because I feel that it's the same when you talk about these kind of things. If you say these things, people just immediately try to pigeonhole you into this DSM definition. It's, oh, maybe you should get help. And it's like, what? So I'm not allowed to like honestly experience what I'm experiencing without feeling wrong about it. I actually felt like that for years. I felt like there was something wrong with me. Ironically, it was actually meeting my therapist, who, like I said earlier, I've been with for 5 years. It was actually meeting him and talking over with this with him so much, what I realized that there was actually nothing wrong about this at all. It's totally, it's not bad at all to be questioning the meaning and the purpose and the reasoning behind life, but it's just something that's not super common, so it comes off as a kind of taboo. And as a culture, we tend to be a lot less comfortable in unknowing and uncertainty than even if the sense of certainty and knowing that we do have, even if that's entirely arbitrary and fabricated, because it helps us more in the sense of our immediate survival, and it allows us to potentially attain more resources or higher quality mates, or even more social validation, I think is the biggest reason now. We'll just take that as like, okay, well, that must be the truth then. No reason to question anything else. But it's like, yeah, but that just indicates that you don't really have like a burning desire to know the truth of your experience or to penetrate into what's really happening. And your mental landscape's probably quite shallow. Not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it definitely doesn't mean that you should be criticizing people when they do actually think deeper about things, or they have a more existential relationship to reality or themselves. So it's very difficult to communicate this out to people. It's very difficult to often be able to admit this even in yourself, because there's not really a safe space for you to be able to do that a lot of the time. I think another thing I would add to this is that there's constant survival pressures that we have to adhere to that engender in us a sense of anxiety and a sense of feeling like you always need to get to the next thing or you're fucked. And one function of that consistent sense of anxiety and that consistent restlessness in us, one function of that is that it doesn't really allow us to get in touch with how we feel. See, like when we relax and when we stop and when we question openly and groundedly and authentically and we're honest, and we admit that we don't know and we just turn in and we just wonder, it's like you quickly come in touch with how you really feel as a being, as a human being, not as a human doing, not as who you are in the social hierarchy, not as who you are relative to this person and that person, but just by yourself in your own space. You just recognize what's being felt in your direct experience, what's being registered in your body field, what's being registered in your thoughts, in your mind, in the space here. And we often don't know how to get in touch with how we feel and what we're experiencing. In fact, actually, a good example of this is if you go out anywhere in a public space, particularly if you take public transport. I live in Melbourne, so we have a tram network here, and I'll often get the tram into the city from here. And it's amazing to see how much energy and effort goes into people keeping themselves asleep from having to actually just experience the rawness of this at any given point. Like, there are so many times where I'll have a laugh to myself because you can't even find one person who's not drawn into their phone or smartphone or device, or at the very least, like, listening to music. The very least has a pair of these in. And it's not to say any of those things are wrong. I'm not trying to criticize those things in and of itself. It's just that the process by which we use that stuff is we put so much time and energy into keeping ourselves distracted from actually just experiencing what it's like to be alive directly. And I don't just mean armchair philosophizing about life and, what does it all mean? I mean, that has its own place, but I mean actually just being in touch with the raw, almost like physical nature of what it means to exist here, what it is to exist here. I think we're often very far away from what we're experiencing most directly. And as I said, I think this engenders a constant sense of distance, like a farness in our own experience. It's like we don't really know where to settle. We just keep comparing ourselves to what we feel like we should be and where we feel like we should go. We don't actually necessarily take time to just check in with ourselves and acknowledge what's being felt or what's being experienced, or to question it openly, or to look around the room and not just know what everything is, but to experience it more directly and to notice what we're layering on top of existence. And it's the same with our relationships as well. Like being in front of someone and actually just looking into their eyes and noticing them as this mysterious creation. Not just as like your friend James and that's it. But like just noticing their being and their presence and actually sensing them in front of you and being in front of them. We're so identified with the conceptualization that we layer over our experience oftentimes that we don't really have a very direct sense of what the experience is actually like in itself. And I think this contributes greatly to this whole theme of meaninglessness. When we're not really connected to life, when we're not really connected to experience, it's very difficult to fall into it and really be one with it and really know that. And so I guess like I would tie some of these thoughts and feelings up. Again, this was never meant to be a how-to video. This is just, sometimes people comment on my videos and they'll say like, well, what do I do about it? And it's like, I don't know. Like these are just mostly expressions and honest thoughts and feelings. They're just things that I experience. Most of the value I get from people when I watch videos or I read books, it's more about relating. It's not often about how-tos, because I assume that if something really authentic comes up or sparks from something, I need to really go in on that in myself. I don't just need to hear it from someone else, you know. I think that's a very lazy way of looking at things, just for me. But I guess I would tie this up by saying that if you are experiencing this, you're definitely not alone, because I've met a lot of people who are, but we phrase it and contextualize it in different ways. And it's okay as well. It's okay to experience life as an unknown, as an unknown origin. It's okay to feel insecure when you're around other people or when you're approaching new circumstances. Things like that. It's okay to not really feel perfect or not know where it's going. And it's okay also to just take time for yourself and to console yourself and to go into what you're feeling, or to read a fucking novel or something and not have to just worry about how you're going to improve everything once in a while. Just notice how that's something that gets layered over the experience of life as it is. And you can let that go. You don't have to keep always fighting for the next thing. You know? It's okay to turn in and actually derive something just from your direct experience. And sometimes we need a reminder of that. So there are some thoughts and feelings on that. If you can relate to this, if you got value out of this and you haven't already, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, liking the video, sharing this to anyone you feel like might get value out of it, commenting for the algorithm. My email's down below. Thank you for everything. Emails, donations, blah, blah, blah. I hope you're having a beautiful day, even if it's one where you can't find the ultimate meaning just today. And I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.